The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma. On December 19th, the United States imposed financial sanctions on Georgia's Minister of Internal Affairs, Vakhtang Gomelauri. Gomelauri was added to the Treasury sanctions list under the Global Magnitsky Act, which is linked to the unlawful use of force by the Ministry of Internal Affairs against peaceful protesters. On the same day, financial sanctions were also imposed on Mirza Kezevadze, deputy head of the Special Task Department. On December 19th, the United Kingdom also imposed financial sanctions. Those included in the sanctions list by the United Kingdom are Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs Alexandre Darakhvelidze, Director of the Tbilisi Police Department Sulkhan Tamazashvili, Head of the Special Tasks Department Zviad Kharazishvili, and his deputy Miller Lagazauri. The banking system is an integral part of the international financial system. It has consistently defended to and will continue to defend the sanctions and decisions imposed by United States, the European Union and the United Kingdom, acting in compliance with them, reads a statement issued by the Georgian Banking Association on December 20th. The statement relates to the U.S. Treasury sanctions against the Minister of Internal Affairs and the financial sanctions imposed by the United Kingdom on senior officials of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. On December 20th, the European Commission announced an initiative to revoke the visa-free regime for holders of Georgian diplomatic passports. The Commission will place this initiative on the agenda of the European Council leaders. The recommendation to prepare this restriction project was addressed to the European Commission during the meeting of EU foreign ministers on December 16th. The Free Business GE platform has already been joined by around 2,000 companies, and the verification process for approximately 1,000 additional companies is still underway, after which they will also be added. Given the current situation in the country, the primary demands of businesses are the scheduling of new elections and the release of those arrested during the protests before the new year. Businesses can express their support for these demands by registering on the website. After registration, a working group verifies the business entity and the company is added to the list of supporting businesses. In January-November 2024, Georgia exported goods worth $6 billion to foreign markets, representing around 8% increase compared to the same period of the previous year. The Monetary Policy Committee of the National Bank of Georgia decided to keep the monetary policy rate, refinancing rate, unchanged. At its meeting on December 18, 2024, the monetary policy rate remains at 8%. The Ministry of Finance published statistics on Georgia's external debt as of November 30th. According to the report, Georgia's public debt amounts $8.64 billion, which is $190 million less compared to October. However, the main reason for this decrease was not to the government's repayment of debts, but the depreciation of the euro. In November 2024, the volume of remittances received in Georgia decreased to $267 million, which is 10% less compared to the same period of the previous years. The main reason for the decline is a 61% drop in remittances from the Russian Federation, linked to the waning effect of migration. However, in countries with increasing migration flows from Georgia, remittances are on the rise. In November, the United States ranked number 1 in remittances with $50 million sent, reflecting 22% year-over-year increase. The Chief Investment Officer of the pension agency, Goga Melikidze, has resigned from his position since the launch of the pension system. He has been responsible for managing the fund's investments. Starting in 2025, changes are planned within the agency's management structure, with the pension fund board becoming the highest governing body. The members of this board will be appointed by the Prime Minister. To form this board, 8 vacancies have been announced, with annual salaries ranging from 190,000 to 250,000 Georgian laris. In an exclusive interview with the program Analytics, Arvind Ramakrishnan, the head of the analytical team at Fitch Ratings, stated the outlook for Georgia's sovereign credit rating, which was downgraded from stable to negative in December this year, is unlikely to return to a positive outlook by the next review.
This is The Checkpoints. I'm Elena Kvantilashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to sum up Business and Economics Week for you. The Commission is proposing to suspend part of the EU-Georgia agreement on the facilitation of the issuance of visas. If the Council adopts this proposal, Georgian diplomats, officials and their families holding diplomatic and official passports would require a visa to travel to the EU for short stays of up to 90 days in any 180-day period. Visa facilitations such as shorter application times, lower visa fees, and the requirement to submit fewer supporting documents would also no longer apply to Georgian holders of diplomatic and official passports. This decision would not have a negative impact on people-to-people contacts, as Georgian nationals who are holders of ordinary passports will continue to benefit from the visa exemption when traveling to the EU for short stays. This proposal is a response to the violent repression by the Georgian authorities against peaceful protesters, the Commission says, politicians and independent media, which started after the authorities announced on 28 November to no longer pursue the opening of negotiations with the EU until 2028. The Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, is sanctioning 2 Georgian officials, Vakhtang Gomelauri and the Deputy Head of the Special Task Department, Mirza Kezevadze, for their engagement in brutal crackdowns on media members, opposition figures and protesters, including during demonstrations throughout 2024. According to the OFAC statement, these officials are being sanctioned under Executive Order 13818 Global Magnitsky, following the September 16, 2024 sanctions of 2 other Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs officials. This action was coordinated with the United Kingdom, which designated 5 individuals responsible for human rights violations in Georgia. In the wake of Georgia's election, key officials in the Ministry of International Affairs engaged in a severe and vicious crackdown against their own people, including the international targeting of journalists and use of violence, said acting Under Secretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Bradley Smith. The United States remains committed to holding accountable those who seek to limit the rights of their citizens and undermine fundamental freedoms in Georgia and around the world. As a result of today's action, all property and interests in property of the designated persons described above that are in the United States or in the possession or use control of U.S. persons are blocked and must be reported to OFAC. In addition, any entities that are owned directly or indirectly, individually or in the aggregate, 50% or more by one or more blocked persons are also blocked. Unless authorized by a general or specific license issued by OFAC or exempt, OFAC's regulations generally prohibit all transactions by the U.S. persons or within or transmitting the United States that involve any property or interest in property of designated or otherwise blocked persons. In addition, financial financial institutions and other persons that engage in the certain transactions or activities with the sanctioned individuals may expose themselves to sanction or be subject to an enforcement action. The prohibitions include the making of any contribution or provision of funds, goods, or services by, to, or for the benefit of any designated person, or the receipt of any contribution or provision of funds, goods, or services from any such person. Building upon the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act was issued on December 20, 2017 in recognition that the prevalence of human rights abuse and corruption that have their source in whole or in substantial part outside the United States had reached such scope and gravity as to threaten the stability of international political and economic systems. The UK has sanctioned 5 senior individuals responsible for violent attacks against journalists and peaceful protesters in Georgia in coordinated action with the United States. Georgia's authorities began a systematic crackdown on demonstrations, civil society, media, and opposition figures following public opposition to Georgian Dream's decision to pause the country's move towards a European future. The decision undermines a core component of Georgia's constitution and is widely viewed as the latest step by Georgian Dream, which makes Georgia more vulnerable to the Kremlin. Individuals designated today, which include the Georgian Minister and Deputy Minister for Internal Affairs and 3 high-ranking police chiefs, face UK travel bans and asset freezes, excluding them from the UK and its economy. The announcement follows the UK's decision last week to immediately suspend all UK program support to the Georgian government and restrict engagement with Georgian Dream. These measures further protect UK national security, one of the strong foundations upon which the government's missions are delivered, by working with international partners to prevent harm, deter and disrupt threats, and respond effectively to incidents. Foreign Secretary David Lammy said the shocking violence inflicted upon protesters, opposition leaders, and journalists is an egregious act on democracy and the Georgian people's right to exercise their fundamental freedoms. Our action today shows that the UK stands with the people of Georgia and will consider all options to ensure those responsible are held to account. Individuals sanctioned are Vakhtang Gomelauri, Minister of Internal Affairs, Alexander Darakvelidze, Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs, Sulkhan Tamazashvili, Tbilisi Policy Department Director, Zviad Karazishvili, Chief of the Special Tasks Department, Mileri Lagazauri, Deputy Head of the Special Tasks Department. Following parliamentary elections in October, riot police have used water cannons, tear gas, and rubber bullets to disperse peaceful protesters, with reports of individuals being targeted and beaten, which have been verified by the Public Defender Ombudsman of Georgia. UN experts have condemned the pattern of repression and human rights violations in Georgia. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, in which Georgia is itself a participating state, has called this suppression a serious breach of the right of freedom of assembly. In June, the UK paused its annual flagship strategic dialogue, the Wardrop Dialogue, with Georgia in response to an increase in anti-Western rhetoric and the adoption of Kremlin-inspired laws which restrict media freedoms and limit equality for the Georgian people. On December 18, the U.S. Helsinki Commission stressed that the ruling Georgian Dream Party is dragging Georgians away from their chosen path to Euro-Atlantic integration and towards the axis of aggressors' intent of undermining the democratic world order. The Commission noted that GD is moving the country closer to autocratic states, and should the Georgian Dream prevail in seizing power, it will turn Georgia into a venue for power projection for autocratic states. Despite massive resistance from Georgian people, GD continues to integrate with the world's autocrats, noted the Commission, citing Georgian Prime Minister Kobakidze's visit to the Iranian President Pezeshkian's inauguration, which the Commission said served both GD's efforts to strengthen economic ties with Iran and an increased support from the Iranian proxies in spreading anti-Western narratives in GD's campaign. The Commission also pointed out that the GD signed a strategic partnership agreement with China and then decided to entrust the Anaklia Deep Sea project to a Chinese consortium to serve as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Should Georgian dream prevail in seizing power, the party would turn Georgia into a venue for power projection and economic opportunity, not only for its Russian patrons, but also for China and Iran, with whom GD has become increasingly close, underlined the Commission. On December 16, Kaja Kallas, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, confirmed the decision of EU ministers to suspend visa liberalization for Georgian diplomatic passport holders. She condemned the violence against demonstrators and stressed that the suspension of visa-free travel for diplomats was a symbolic first step. At a press conference following a meeting of EU Foreign Affairs Ministers, HRVP Kallas noted that the situation in Georgia is not progressing in the positive direction for Georgian people, stressing that democracies do not oppress opposition voices or curtail the freedom of media. She stated that in response to the ruling party's actions, the EU has downgraded political contacts and cut funding for the Georgian government. What more could Georgian people expect from the EU? The Checkpoints interviewed Ryhor Yozviak just as the meeting was ongoing. Mr. Yozviak, thank you for being with us and thank you for taking our questions. What is the process that is going on within the EU right now regarding sanctions, regarding the issue of Georgia on the agenda? Please elaborate a little bit first on this.
So actually right now, as we speak, EU foreign ministers in Brussels are actually discussing Georgia. They just started the discussion that is expecting to last a little bit over an hour. Sanctions are on the table. There are a list of, let's say, 9 people that they were considering sanctioning, meaning asset freeze, visa ban. The problem is that there's no unanimity. For these sort of sanctions, you need unanimity. It doesn't exist in the room. It's Hungary, but it's also a few others that are against this. So the other thing they're looking at is to impose a suspension of visa liberalization on Georgian diplomatic passports. This is something that doesn't need unanimity, and it's possible that a sort of preliminary decision can be taken very soon, possibly today, possibly a bit later. And this is a very symbolic step. As you know, most diplomats have normal passports as well, but it is what the EU can sort of start doing already now, in a sense.
What is the effect of these mixed messages, in your opinion, Mr. Yozviak? What effect do they have on the overall process evolving in Georgia? What is your take on that?
I think, of course, it weakens the EU standing in a sense, right? Because there's one thing talking about words, as you say, and then there's actions, and actions are not too impressive, let's put it that way. But on the other hand, to the defense of the EU, many of the sort of measures were already taken before. For example, it was already clear in the summer that Georgia is stuck on enlargement. The EU wasn't ready to go any further with Georgia, and they were ready to go much faster and much quicker with Moldova, Ukraine. That's already a punishment. The other thing was that already over 100 million euros were frozen. That's another decision. And then in the end, there isn't that much else you can do. It is the sanctions, but that was always going to be difficult because of Hungary. And then it's the visa liberalization. And then the question is as well, should the EU punish everyone by the actions of a few? And I would even argue for most Georgians that this would be very unfair, that they should suffer because of something that's happened within a few people in their government, right? So I don't want to defend the EU, but there are also limits to what the European Union can do. I've followed sanctions policy for 20 years as a journalist, and in many cases, the EU has not even managed to go to any sort of sanctions. I'm thinking about Serbia, for example, that have behaved very badly, and there's never been any punishment in a sense. So while I understand Georgian frustration, I also think that one must understand the limits of an organization that consists of 27 individual member states. It's rarely slow. It's rarely quick, and it's not as hard-hitting as some wish. It always comes down to some sort of compromise.
Then can we say that the rhetoric, openly stating that there should be sanctions on GD officials, is also a positive thing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sort of thing. I think most EU member states are very strong in their opinions and so on. But there's one more element that I think is sort of quite important, that which makes the EU a bit more, let's say, reluctant, and is that the European Union is still waiting for this final ODIHR report about the elections that will come sometime next year, because the election is sort of really the alpha and omega of this thing. And so far, they are listening to ODIHR. And after the ODIHR comes with their pronunciation, whenever they do that in the first quarter of 2025, I also think that the EU has then a bit more to go on, or not, depending on what the report says. So we're in a process now where the EU is also assessing stuff, what's going on. And elections are part of that as well. So I do think that, in a sense, it's hard for the European Union to do anything unless there is really, really concrete evidence. And when it comes to election, it is OSCE or ODIHR that gives that sort of evidence. So there are limits.
You mentioned ODIHR, but what we hear about the ODIHR final report is that they will not explicitly state that the elections, whether the elections in Georgia were free or fair or not. They will list all the positive things, maybe some procedures were well held, and also all the negative things, but will not conclude anything about free and fair elections in Georgia. Then, do you think this report might be open for interpretation, and what is the overall value of this report in the end?
This is true that it's not going to say whether it's free or fair or not, but it's going to basically say so much, right? So there's going to be a lot of things in there. I think there's going to be a lot of negative things in there, I expect. So it will, though, and this is very important when you understand the European Union. European Union is slow-moving, dealing with processes, dealing with facts and figures and evidence. This is the same with all sort of sanctions. And it will provide certain, let's say, groundwork for things in the future. And that's the most important thing, because whenever the European Union imposes anything, it has to be grounded in facts and figures. This is another thing with sanctions as well. You cannot just sanction someone because you don't like them. You need to have evidence. And this ODIHR report can produce some sort of evidence somewhere. And that is important for the EU because, as you may know, with all sorts of different sanctions, especially sanctions on Russians, many rich Russians then go to the EU court and say, this is unfair, remove the sanctions. And sometimes they win because they can afford very expensive lawyers. So same thing can happen in Georgia if there ever are sanctions, that many rich Georgians can also say, this is unfair, we take you to court. So that is why an ODIHR report, even though it takes time, even though it's not conclusive, there is still facts there that are presented as facts that can be used for the EU to strengthen its case. Yeah, so it's not the sexiest answer you will ever get, but it is in the large scheme of things a very important building block for future EU-Georgia relations, whether you want it or not.
On the other hand, we see individual countries, EU countries, imposing sanctions on Georgia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. These are the countries that have already taken concrete specific steps. What is the value of these decisions, and what will it change in the overall picture?
Just Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania is not so much, but then you may have also heard that France, Poland, and Germany are thinking about something as well, and that suddenly changes the picture quite a lot, because you're talking about essentially the three most important political players in the European Union right now. Italy can excuse. So basically, that would be a big change. Of course, you can always argue that, the Schengen zone is like such that you can fly to, let's say, Austria and then drive into Germany and you can still go there. But it would be a real blow, I think, for the Georgian authorities that they can't travel to certain of the big countries. And these three countries are right now very big countries. I mean, France and Germany are essentially the motor that keeps the European Union going, and Poland is, I would say, a growing star within the European Union, which also will have the presidency next year for the next 6 months. So it's very symbolic and quite significant, I would say. So since we're probably not going to get EU sanctions, to have, you know, the three most powerful countries imposing individual sanctions on people is a blow. And it is something that could potentially have an effect. And I think even maybe when these three join, that even more countries, other Scandinavian countries, for example, can do stuff as well, maybe Netherlands.
What would you say has changed after Irakli Kobakhidze's November 28 statement and this date coming into the picture, 2028, both locally and internationally?
I think it changed mainly within Georgia, because it became very clear in Georgia have seemed to be slipping away. So I think it was a real galvanizing effect on the Georgian population. In the EU and NATO, I think it was more a sort of a confirmation of what they already had been observing for the last few years. As I remember before, you know, a country can suspend, but in this sense, the EU had already done the work for them. The EU had already said, listen, we have suspended it since the summer. So in that sense, from a let's say a political point of view, there was not a big difference. But I think it became very clear that something is not right in Georgia, and that the country was not really willing to engage in anything, because the enlargement process is the political way of engaging with Brussels, especially if you are candidate countries via accession talks. You actually meet on a regular basis. You can just see, for example, now how many Ukrainian ministers, how many Moldovan ministers are in Brussels pretty much every week to discuss various things. So the very fact that Georgians are not there should be give some thought, both on in Georgia and in elsewhere, why they are not there if they are a candidate country.
What, in your opinion, is the value of the demonstrations so far? What type of message is that from the Georgian people?
The reason why the European Union is still, let's say, engaged in the question of Georgia, because let me remind you, there are many other things happening in the world as well. And it would have been very easy for Georgia to just slip down the pecking order and people simply not noticing it. So the very reason why Georgia is still in the political minds, in the media and so on, is because of the protests. And I think that part of why, and this is something EU officials have told me as well, part of why it was so hard for the EU in general to interpret the election result was that they were surprised in a certain sense why not more people came out immediately on election day to protest against what seemed to be a rigging of the elections, right? So the streets is very much keeping the media and the political class in Brussels aware of what's going on in Georgia, because otherwise I can promise you that they will be fully focused on Ukraine, on Russia, on Middle East, on Syria and so on, and Georgia would not be in the news at all. So it's thanks to these sort of protests that it's still up there somewhere in the mind of foreign ministers. I mean, Georgia was not even supposed to be on the agenda of the foreign ministers originally today. So the very fact that it's there shows people power, I would say.
What associations do GD's measures to disperse these demonstrations bring to your mind, and how do you see personally Georgia's demonstrations? Is it Russia? Is it Belarus? Would you go that far?
It's hard to compare protests and protests, but I have, European history, and especially recent history, I'm talking about the last 30 years, which I call recent history, is full of these sort of images. And more often than not, people power tend to prevail. Of course, you can point at ways they didn't prevail, like in Russia and Belarus, for example. But normally and eventually, justice tend to prevail. This is what I've seen in many European countries that are now members of the EU, that this was the road they had to take to one day become part of the West, right? And this is probably the road Georgia has to take as well. So I cannot compare the brutality of things, but let's say that it's quite shocking already, and it's difficult to watch. Let's put it as a human reaction. Let's put it that way.
Going forward, what do you think can make it easier for the EU to reach the consensus and change the overall decision?
I think it will be hard to get a consensus in the EU as long as Viktor Orban is there. As you know, that he has already essentially himself pronounced Georgian Dream as the winners of the elections. I do still think that the ODIHR report will give some clarity of what happened during the elections. But more than anything, I would say that, the future of Georgia is not decided in Brussels and Washington, no matter how much people think, not even in Moscow. The future of Georgia is decided in Georgia. That's how it should be. And based on that, the West will react accordingly. In the end, I do think that Georgians need to understand that the West is looking, but the West is also engaged elsewhere. So in the end, it's not some secret government pulling threads and stuff like that from the West. It's the Georgian people that needs to decide on the Georgian future, no one else. Any uprising, any protest, any revolution, any whatever you want to call it, any change in society comes from within normally. This is what happened in Ukraine as well. It was not the West that somehow, despite Russian propaganda, said that the West helped in any way. It might have happened because of Ukrainians. And this was the same in Armenia. This is going to be potentially the same in Georgia. It's people's protest. This was the same in Poland. This was the same in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary. So, it depends on the Georgian people which way it will go in the end.
Thank you so much for your interview.
Thank you.
At a meeting with journalists organized by the Charter of Journalist Ethics about 2 days ago, EU Ambassador to Georgia, Paul Hurczynski, expressed gratitude and solidarity with the journalists for their dedication and selflessness in carrying out their professional duties, calling attacks on them disgusting, and noted that the EU-Georgia relations are at the lowest point ever because of a series of undemocratic decisions taken by the Georgian parliament and government. Let us now look at the main trends and tendencies in Georgia's economy this week.
The foreign direct investments in Georgia amounted to $197.7 million USD in Q3 2024, down by 55.2% from the adjusted data of Q3 2023. Decrease in equity and reinvestment is main reason for the reduction of FDI, according to the National Statistics Office of Georgia. As of the document, equity amounted to $131.2 million USD in Q3 2024, which is 66.4% of total foreign direct investments. The volume of reinvestment totaling to $353.4 million USD, 13.6% down than the adjusted data of the previous year. The Netherlands, reaching $60.2 million USD in Q3 2024, was the major foreign direct investor country. Malta was the second with $58.3 million USD, followed by the United Kingdom with $55 million USD. The share of three largest investor countries is 78.7% of total investments. The largest share of FDI was registered in the manufacturing sector, reaching $63.6 million USD in Q3 2024. Energy sector was the second with $43 million USD, followed by the trade sector with $32.1 million USD. The share of three largest sectors is 70.2% of total investment. In October, Georgia bought 175 million kilowatt-hour of electricity from Russia. During this period, the country also received electricity from Azerbaijan and Armenia, although in very small volumes. In total this year, electricity imports amounted to 700 million kilowatt-hour, although it will increase further in December-January as Georgia's generation facilities are almost shut down in winter and country consumes either imported electricity or electricity electricity generated for thermal power plants. In recent years, Russia has been the main supplier of electricity. The electricity purchased there is also distributed to occupied Abkhazia. Last year, Georgia imported 786.5 million kilowatt of electricity from Russia, almost all which was consumed by Abkhazia. As for consumption, according to 10 months data, the total consumption across the country amounted to almost 12 billion kilowatt hours. Giorgi Kakaoridze, the first Deputy Minister of Finance of Georgia, on Monday presented updated macroeconomic parameters during a meeting of Budget and Finance Committee of the Parliament, indicating a projected real economic growth rate of 9% for 2024. He also said the anticipated rate of inflation had been adjusted downward to 1%. Kakaoridze noted the nominal gross domestic product was projected to reach 90 billion lari, while tax revenues from the consolidated budget were expected to total 27.26 billion lari. The committee identified an increase in planned revenues for the consolidated budget, which are expected to rise by 1.27 billion lari and amounted to 2561 billion lari. Similarly, the total receipts for the state budget are set to increase by 1.12 billion lari, bringing the total to 25.69 billion lari for 2024. The allocations for state budget will reach 25.93 billion lari, reflecting an increase of 900 million lari over the previously approved plan. After discussions, the committee supported the proposed bill on amendments to the law on the 2024 state budget of Georgia. Georgian economy grew 11% year-on-year in October, while the average real gross domestic product growth for January-October period equaled 10%, the National Statistics Office said in late November.
Georgia's real GDP increased by 11% year over year and amounted to 24.9 billion lari, which is around 9 billion USD during the third quarter of 2024, according to the preliminary data released by the National Statistics Office, Geostat, on December 19. Geostat said the growth was registered in construction, information and communication, wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, education, financial and insurance activities, and public administration and defense, compulsory social security. Geostat reported a decline in real estate activities and electricity, gas, steam and air conditioning supply. Geostat will publish the revised data on November 15, 2025. On December 19, the National Statistics Service of Georgia published also preliminary data indicating that in January-November 2024, Georgia's foreign trade increased by 6.6% year-on-year, totaling USD 20.1 billion in value. In January-November 2024, Georgia's exports increased by 7.9% to USD a little bit over 6 billion, while imports grew by 6.1% to USD 15 billion. As a result, the country's negative trade balance stood at $9 billion, representing 43.1% of its foreign trade turnover. In the same period, Turkey was Georgia's largest trade partner, followed by Russia, the United States, China, and Germany. During the reporting period, most of Georgia's exports went to Kyrgyzstan, followed by Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Russia, and Armenia. Most of Georgia's imports came from Turkey, followed by the United States, Russia, China, and Germany. In January-November 2024, the largest exported commodities were motor cars, followed by ferroalloys, spirituous beverages, wine of fresh grapes, precious metal ores and concentrates, natural or artificial mineral and aerated waters not containing added sugar, waters, mineral and aerated waters containing added sugar, medicaments put up in measured doses, nitrogenous fertilizers, fertilizers, gold unwrought or in semi-manufactured forms or in powder form. Major imports were motor cars, petroleum and petroleum oils, followed by medicaments put up in measured doses, petroleum gases and other gaseous hydrocarbons, telephone sets and apparatus for the transmission or reception of voice, images or other data, including wired wireless networks, automatic data processing machines and units thereof, bars and rods of iron or non-alloy steel, motor vehicles for the transport of goods, cigars, cheroots, cigarillos and cigarettes, structures and parts of structures of iron or steel. How did businesses do this week? Natia Taktakishvili will tell us more.
Revaz Vashakidze, the founder of Chirina, responds to the recent developments in the country, noting that first step needs to be taken in the arrest of police officers and other individuals suspected of violence. Only after these measures can discussions about scheduling new elections be appropriate. In addition, during a special broadcast of Business Weekly, Revaz Vashakidze emphasized that in the current situation persists, the private sector in Georgia faces a green future which could lead to the businesses shutting down and business owners leaving the country. We already have a civil war in Tbilisi and across Georgia. A civil war happens when one part of a nation fights another, and that's exactly what we are seeing. The scale might seem small now, but it will escalate. I'm 70 years old, and we are only one step away from some citizens picking up automatic weapons and firing. We are in a very dangerous zone. As for business development, we are likely heading towards a very bleak outcome. There will probably be no development at all. And if a civil war breaks out, many of us will leave Georgia and shut down our businesses. This is the future we face. De-escalation must be the government's priority. Those police officers or civilians beating people must be arrested. The Minister of Internal Affairs and other officials need to be replaced. Only after these steps can we discuss whether the remaining population has the will to take action. In my view, after the current circumstances, any talk of election is futile because elections cannot be held in such conditions, Revaz Vashakidze said on the Business Weekly broadcast. Shalva Alaverdashvili, the chairman of the Association of Restaurants and Hotels, said that new elections should be held in Georgia to de-escalate the situation. As Alaverdashvili stated during a special broadcast on Business Weekly, 70% of hotels in Tbilisi are completely empty and business is still in self-preservation mood. It has become quite difficult to wake up every morning and hear from friends and relatives that they should be careful. This country can't move forward like this. This is not Russia, this is not Belarus, this is not any other country, this is Georgia, and you can't live like this here. There is a different mentality here. As for business and tourism, you know that it's the most fragile business and everything seems to change instantly. Today, I can already say that almost 70% of Tbilisi hotels are absolutely empty. There are no gas. We are still discussing on Sunday what to do, how to keep the staff, and then what the solution will be. The number of bookings is at a very level that they will not even cover the cost of living. I don't know how much this business has to go through. Stability and peace are very important to us, and the sooner we find a solution, the sooner we'll be able to restore this sector, Alaverdashvili said. GPI Holding General Director Pavel Lomadze notes that given the current situation in the country, the de facto government is obliged to take a step towards the de-escalation in order to prevent the country from entering a severe crisis. Lomadze stated this in a special broadcast of TV program Business Weekly. Pavel Lomadze stated that the rule of single political party crackdown on demonstrators and the current situation in the courts are un-European, which distances the country from European future. As a representative of Austrian company in Georgia, I will not talk about this since European integration is part of our genetics. But what breaks our heart is that everything that is happening in Georgia today is becoming un-European. There is a single party rule. There are big problems in the courts. Demonstrators are being cancelled in a terribly brutal manner on the streets. Gang formations are running around the streets. Everything is abnormal. The first thing that needs to be done firmly is to stop these raids and release the prisoners, and this must be done quickly. Then we must move on the process of de-escalation and finding long-term compromises, said Pata Lomadze, General Director of GPI Holding, on the air of Business Weekly program. Giorgi Margvelashvili, founder of Tbilivino, deeply believes that the society and business need to be attentive due to the given situation in the country. A brilliant part of the society stands at the rallies, and I am proud to see them. I'm proud to be there too, Margvelashvili said. According to him, businessmen are accustomed to obligations. The business sector is currently fulfilling its obligation to the state honestly, while the state is failing to fulfill its fundamental obligations, including safety of its citizens. Today, walking around Tbilisi at night has become dangerous. I have to think about safe routes to get home. When I'm out in the city with my children, my friends' children or their families, I don't feel safe. I hope the government fulfills its obligation and protects the safety of its citizens, Giorgi Margvelashvili said in BMG TV's program Business Weekly. Giorgi Abramishvili, co-founder of Data Center Solutions, urges the business for unity. As he stated in a special broadcast of Business Weekly, the business community should understand its role in the country more, and the government should fulfill the orders of both business and citizens. We should get out of this post-Soviet syndrome. We must understand that we are creating wealth in this country with our taxes of 27 billion lari. Business solves the problems of the citizens, and so business is not a vessel of the government. We are first and foremost creators, and everything loses its meaning. What is the point when they take away our dignity, take away our freedom? No amount of money and prosperity can outweigh this. I think the main thing is to unite and set an example for everyone, for the rest of the business. We have this power. This country is ours, not the government, and we shouldn't be their vassals. The solution is ultimately that new elections should be held, Abramishvili said. TBC Bank Deputy General Director Gogat Khelidze echoes the ongoing processes in the country and calls on the government to punish violent groups. The detention centers and hospitals are filled with our children. There is no video evidence where young people are standing peacefully and are attacked by police officers. When a criminal gang brutally attacked media representatives and citizens, the patrol officers standing nearby didn't do anything protect them. So far, not a single violent police officer has been punished. Government, come to your senses. You are destroying the country, Gogat Khelidze notes on social media. PSP Group condemns the violence during protests in various cities of Georgia, according to the statement issued by the group. As of the company must return to the legal path of joining the European Union. PSP Group, which employs more than 8,000 people, it's a fully fledged company serving the medical sector. Primary health care organizations are created to ensure the health of Georgian citizens, regardless of their political views, and their obligation is to provide uninterrupted medical services to the population so that they have access to the necessary medical services and medicines. We condemn the violence on the streets of Tbilisi and other cities of Georgia. We want our country to be thoroughly democratic and to return to the legal path of joining the European Union without interruption, the statement reads. The Ceramics Workshop Kirke has released a statement on social media in response to the ongoing events in the country. According to the post, they condemn violence against citizens and declare that Georgia will become part of Europe. Our customers are probably wondering why we don't have the New Year's mood as usual and why our page is not filled with positive posts. Company Kirke condemns all the forms of violence against every citizen and condemns ourselves obliged to take a clear position against violence. This is a time when we should all unite around one opinion. Georgia will definitely become part of Europe, the statement reads. Construction and renovation material company Nova has issued a statement regarding the recent developments in Georgia, noting that the company condemns violence and deeply believes that Georgia's European path is without an alternative. The statement notes that the company has been creating Georgian products with European standards and investments for many years. The relationship between Georgia and European Union began in 1991 when Georgia gained independence. Since 1991, the Georgian people have been trying to protect the very value that is expressed in these words: I'm Georgian and therefore I'm European. We have been creating Georgian products with European standards and investments for many years. These are the values that unite more than 1,000 Nova employees. These are the values that create the Nova company. We condemn violence and we believe that Georgia's European path does not have an alternative, this statement reads. Wishlist, one of the largest importers of European and American children's brands in Georgia, has issued a statement expressing solidarity with all these arrested in the peaceful protests. According to the company, it always stood for the right side, as its refusal to sell Russian products also confirms. We express solidarity with all those detained in peaceful protests and condemn all forms of violence against peaceful demonstrators. Since its inception, our company has chosen the European path and our main partners are leading European and American companies. We have always stood on the side of the people, and this is very clearly visible in our activities after 2022. With the message, say no to Russian products and show your share of social responsibility. The company deliberately lost huge sales by refusing Russian wooden beds 2 years ago, but we are still proud of this decision. Regrettably, our competitors did not join this decision, and Russian wooden products are also actively sold in many shopping malls, online sites, and branded stores, the statement reads.
The ruling party has taken a clearly defined Russian path, has set itself on the Russian path, and is portraying itself as if it wants to move towards Europe. This actually started before the elections, although many people might not see it, and I myself did not clearly see the Russian path of the Georgian dream, which began on June 29, 2019, during the Gavrilov incident. The president of Georgia, Salome Zurabishvili, stated in her speech delivered in the European Parliament, as the president noted, in Georgia, there are people on one side and the repressive machine of the government on the other side. With these words, I will say goodbye till next Sunday, but before that, of course, follow us on BM.G for more news and analysis in business and economics.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.